need to work through conflict resolution, and I just haven't been doing it. It's just not something that's going to go well, I think. But I was convicted that I needed to do that, and so it's so much emphasis because the conflict resolution. If you're not in conflict, you're in denial. I mean, because if you're living with people, humans are going to have conflict. So dealing with conflict in the proper way is important to taking ground in your closed group. It's important to dealing with in your community group outside of Prodigal. It's important at work, at home, at play, anywhere there is. So we don't apologize for how much we emphasize that because it's the basis for how we interact with people. And so it's really important. So I would just ask you, what is your initial reaction to conflict? Like Jenny says to me a lot of times, she says, I just hate conflict. I'm not like you. I hate conflict. And she says it all the time. And I say, babe, I don't know what you think about me. I don't like conflict. I'd rather just sit here with you and no conflict because we never have any conflict. But the point is, I think a lot of people will have several different responses if we're honest. You know, a lot of people, this is my modus. I'll get quiet and withdraw. And because I'm not yelling or cursing or doing anything like that, I think people think I'm a good guy. And the fact is that it was pointed out to me by several of my friends that everybody knows when I'm upset because I withdraw, I shut up, and when I shut up, it's just like me yelling, right? Because I'm yelling all the time. And so, but that's what I do. I withdraw. And does it change your relationship? In other words, you say, I'm going to punish them by withdrawing from this relationship that they value. I do that. And I don't know how you do it. That's one of my go-tos. Is it anger, attack, bullying? Your initial reaction to conflict. Be honest with ourselves. I think I just would ask you to, you don't have to tell anybody right or left, just in your own mind, kind of think about where you are in these situations. Is it sadness? You know, when you have conflict and you're attacked, are you sad? Do you feel hurt? I think that's what many of us do. Do you decide to get back by acting nice and then going for the next 6 months or maybe 6 years, gossiping about that person and trying to undermine their credibility, the person that attacked you or that you're in conflict with, to make yourself look better? Or you just dismiss it. That person is unworthy to have that opinion, and I'm just going to act like I can just dismiss it because it just never happened. You justify the situation. And so those are all reactions. So what is that? Those would all be worldly, normal reactions and reactions that I struggle with all the time in conflict. And what would you say the cause for that is? Anybody? Selfishness? Pride. Bingo. They're all together. Selfishness, pride. It leads back to every source of conflict, in my opinion, is pride. And so let's go back and look at some of those. And let's see what the Bible would say about that as we review this quickly. So what if it's withdrawal or change your relationship? Well, Hebrews would say, consider how we might spur one another on to love and good deeds, and let us continue to meet with one another. And that's not a good response. What about anger and attacks? James 1:18-19 says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because a man's anger does not bring about the righteousness that God desires. Sadness. If you're sadness because someone doesn't like you or attacks you or is in conflict with you, then the cure for that is that your identity is a child of God, and those scriptures are there. Now, you've got notes, and I'm going to go a little slower. You can write these down. I'm going to take a moment here just to remind you that my talk is not related. My talk is related to conflict, but it doesn't follow your handout. And the handout, somebody got frustrated with me last week and said, what about that guy up there that he's not going by the handouts? He hand out here and I don't get this. Well, just think about the day when we have a book and you bring the book in, and every week that's your lesson. So we're not there yet. So I'm handing the handout for next week. But I'm going to give you enough time to write that down. And if you need any of those references, just ask me or ask your leaders. We can get you these. Gossip. Let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what's helpful for building others up according to their needs, so that it may benefit those who listen. Or dismissal or justification. A man who covers his sins does not prosper. but he who confesses them finds mercy. I mean, there's biblical counters to every one of those worldly reactions, and every one of those world reactions attack our pride. I think if you could remember one thing that changes everything for me when I'm in conflict is I would ask myself, what is the purpose? What is my goal in resolving this conflict? If you could define the goal clearly about resolving the conflict, it will change you right from the start. And that goal is not winning. It's not revenge. It's reconciliation. Your goal is to honor God in all that you do, and your goal is to reconcile. If your goal is going into this is to reconcile, because Jesus, it's important to Jesus. He said, a new command I give you, love one another. As I've loved you, you must love one another. That's how they're going to know that you're different, because you love one another. So when you go into a conflict, and your goal is to reconcile, it's defeating, isn't it? I mean, because you want to go kick some rear. It's what you want to do in conflict. That guy offended me. I want to go show him he's wrong, and I want to get back on the up and up. And that leads to nowhere. And it leads to where everybody else is, and it doesn't lead people to the God that died for you, that you want them to know. They'll never get there if your goal is to beat them or have revenge. If you flip the tables and go to them because you want to reconcile with them personally, you are loving them in a way that the world has no idea what that looks like most of the time. So check your motives. It should be for reconciliation and not revenge. Look at this. Make every effort to live at peace with all men and to be holy. See to it that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. In Romans 12, 18, 19, if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, because you can't control the other person. I know many of you are in conflict with your prodigal tonight. But if it's as possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath. And so what is the source of conflict? Let's get back to that pride. Don't you find it amazing that all the answers are in the Bible? I get so encouraged when God tells us all the answers that we're looking for. What causes these fights and quarrels among you? You want something, but you don't get it. You kill and you covet, but you cannot have what you want. If you go to conflict and you go, hey, what's up with you and Jenny, or what's up with you and Larry, or whatever, and you say it's complicated. It's complicated. It's too complicated. I couldn't describe it to you. Really? Pretty complicated, is it? What did they take from you that you really want? I mean, they take your power, your prestige, your money, what was it? That's the source of it. And so I'd say as we worship idols, the greed, the envy, revenge, if they're impacting, they're telling us our children aren't what they should be, our respect in the community, if they're taking our love, if they're taking their love away from us, something we want, their relationship, those are the sources of conflict. And I think one of the things that stood out to me is one of many things in that book, Unforgettable, that you know is one of my favorites. He made a great point very clearly. Many people have made it, but I kind of heard it for the first time clearly when he said, it's easy, the more stuff you have and the more stuff that you hold on to and the tighter you have, the more easy it is for you to be offendable. And I kind of translated that, and I kind of said my own words here is that the more possessions we have, the more idols we have, the more things we put above God, the more things we hold on to tightly, and the more value we place on them, and the more tighter we hold, the more we're going to be offended if someone or something tries to take them. And this will lead to a predictable and repeated conflict. If you're always in conflict, take a moment and ask if I'm holding on to things too tightly. Because if you actually felt that the only thing you really truly needed was to be loved by God and to know that he was enough and that you win at the end. I know that seems like, to so many people, it sounds like it's too simple. It's really not. It's the meaning of life. It's that simple. And if we had that and we didn't hold on to anything, our conflicts would be less. We would be less offended because it doesn't matter, really. It just seems like it does. And so the question in conflict is, don't mess with my idol. So if you're in conflict with someone, it's a good way to look at it. I think Ray Stedman was a theologian in California, and he says it very well. How do we do that? We want to start by clearing up only the results of conflict. You took this from me, you need to give it back, you need to apologize, da-da-da-da. But God never starts at that point. He starts with the person. He says peace is a person, and in order for you to live at peace with someone else, you must be at peace with the person of Jesus Christ. Because think about it, if you are at peace with Jesus, I get it. I've been living for myself. I've been holding on to my idols. I finally get the fact that you intervened in time. As crazy as this, the only thing that you wanted in heaven that you had to get off your throne and come get was me. You had to come die for my sins. I get that now. My life's secure. I'm okay with any circumstance because you know what's going on in my life right now. You care for me. You love me. And when my day is done, I'm with you forever. I got peace with that now. And everything I thought was important is not that important. So how do I go? So if you can get to that relationship with Jesus Christ, it looks different in the way that you handle conflicts and the way that you are at peace. That's where you start to have peace in your life, but you've got to first get it with Jesus. It says in Ephesians 2:14 through 16, if you want to look at that, he himself is our peace. He reconciled to God through the cross for our peace. He's our peace. When Christ, and think about it, when Christ makes peace, it's satisfying. And I want to make sure it's really clear, you might discuss it in your group. Agreeing not to fight is not peace. Okay, that's peace faking, not peacemaking. Just because you're not in fighting with someone else does not mean that you've made peace. Because when Christ makes peace, it's satisfying because relationships are restored. It's not awkward to see them again. Think about that. That's a high bar. But when that happens and when I've seen that take place, it actually grows relationship. I'm going to talk about that a little bit next week because next week we're going to talk about community. And conflict in the context of community makes community flourish. So we have to talk about conflict and how we deal with that so that we can use that in our community. Because if we know Jesus, I've already said, we win. He loves us. He's enough, and we're all we need. And so when we're less offendable, we're more humble. And when we're more humble, it makes any conflict easier. And so if you just had one slide and you just looked at this, every conflict is an opportunity to glorify God. And I heard that the very first time in my first introductory class at Watermark when Dean McFarland, who's now an elder and was a friend of mine, and he said, I have a copy of that field guide. It wasn't called the field guide then, but it was the conflict resolution handsheet. I have one in my briefcase. I have one in my office. I have one in my bathroom. And I was going, wow, I mean, this guy's drank the Kool-Aid on this conflict thing, right? But he said, the thing I remember, like what I just told you is remembering about the purpose is reconciliation changes things. For him, it was, I recommend, 1 Corinthians 10:31, 11:1 talks about this, but it talks about the fact that every conflict is an opportunity to glorify God. And we can glorify God by trusting him, making peace with Jesus, letting people see that, serving others, telling them truth that will grow them, bearing their burdens, confronting them in love. And you're going to become more Christ-like as you confess your own sin and grow from this conflict. You'll glorify God in the way that you take constructive criticism and make yourself better to become more like Christ and bring him glory. You turn from these attitudes that promote conflict, this critical negativity, and you let go of your idols. So in doing that, in your handout, there are all the details of how you handle this. It's basically the conflict guide kind of fleshed out, and you guys can discuss that tonight. That's not the purpose of this shorter talk. But in summary, you work through conflict fairly straightforward. It's not complicated. It's all in Matthew 18:15 through 17. You go to the person directly, no email or texting. If that doesn't work, I can't talk to my prodigal very well without a third person at this point. I just don't. So I tend to not attempt that very much. And so I have to widen the circle and get someone to help me. If that doesn't work, you widen the circle to a larger group. And when I say the church, that might mean if you're in community, that would be your community director. It might be somebody on the community team. If they widen that, we might go up that for the people that are in charge of community. It might be somebody, if it's a marriage issue, in the marriage team. Eventually, in this church, it would lead all the way to the elders, but that is a long, arduous process. It doesn't go there quickly. And then if someone over 2 or 3 years, or whatever that time looks like, is just not taking counsel, and despite enormous amounts of effort in widening the circle, then Matthew 18:17 says, you let them go their way. There's a way that seems right to man, but at the end it leads to death. But I'm going to let you go try this out. I'm going to let you go figure that out and see if that works, because we've done everything else, and I just hope you hit a bottom that lets you realize that I don't think this is going to go well for you. And then you treat them as a non-believer, which seems harsh until you realize that you treat non-believers. How would you treat somebody you had never met, that never was in conflict with, and you met them? What would you do? You'd ask them to the coffee shop. You'd have coffee with them. You'd tell them about Jesus. You'd tell them the love that you'd tell them your story about how he saved your life, and you'd try to bring them home. That's what you do for non-believers. You don't shun them. They're not your wise counsel. You don't bring them into your inner circle, but you love them. You just like you would any non-believer, and you try to call them home. And you hope that the sorrow brings them enough pain to come home. So how do you approach and deal with conflict? If you have a lack of conflict in your life, as I close here, it's a red flag. I remember we went on a sailing trip with some of the closest couples in the world, and one of the ladies in there, this is 15 years ago, said, "Man, this is an amazing group. We're the luckiest people in the world. We never have conflict." This is right when we first came to Watermark, within the first year. Since that time, there's been infidelity, alcoholism, every conflict you can imagine, and we've worked through it, and our group and our relationships are so strong because of that. And I just think about that statement that they made a long time ago. We were living in denial. We didn't have any conflict. If you don't have conflict in your life, don't look for it. But if you don't have it, you're not living authentically as Jesus would have you do that. And my best and deepest relationships, I'll tell you, as I was thinking about this tonight, is defined by the sparks of iron sharpening iron. I don't have a relationship that's meaningful and deep and trustworthy that I haven't had some conflict along the way. My nephew is one of the best friends I have. My brother's son, my brother that passed away, my only brother that passed away. And when we go on a hunting trip, at some point during that trip, we come almost to going old school and hitting one another. I mean, we are at each other. We never do it. We sharpen and we work through it because we just live so closely and we're just unabashed. My wife and I mean, I was joking a minute ago, but we work through issues. We keep short accounts, and that's why she's just so valuable to me, and our relationship is so deep. One of my buddies told me one time that hurt me deeply that people don't want to play golf with you because you're so intense and you've got to win all the time. That's a good shock. I know, it's a laugh. I got it. It hurt me. I remember right where he was when he said it, but I have never played golf the same way. I mean, I've fallen into that. But I don't want to be that guy. He helped me, but it took me weeks to get over that. But he's one of my best friends in the world. I know he loves me. He loves me enough to say that. And so I think the same thing with God, right? God has sharpened me through the loss of my brother, through Satan's attack and my prodigal and whatever, and I've wrestled with him. But my relationship has gotten stronger through the conflicts and dealing with that, and that's why it's so important. And I would just tell you that I think it comes down to pride and humility. And it's kind of summed up in Micah 6-8. And, the Lord has told us what he desires of us. And he's told us that we are to act justly, to love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. Love mercy. Love mercy in conflict. Love having mercy on the people you're in conflict with. To act as justly and righteous, to tell them the truth. to love them, to let them know you love them enough that they can trust your honest comments when you admonish them, and to walk humbly every step of the way. So I think pride and humility are at the key points of this. And a person that walks humbly with God, that's what he demands of us in Micah, and that's what brings Jesus glory, and that's why conflict resolution is so important. So bow your heads with me before we go into the group. Lord, I just thank you for how you allowed us to have sound tonight at the last minute. I thank you that, more importantly, that you allowed us to have meaning and purpose by having a relationship with you. I thank you that you've given us a way to live counter to the world that doesn't deal with conflict well, where people are running around in this crazy world and driving too fast, and anger and cursing and prideful behavior that is ruining the world. And you've given us a different way. It's countercultural, but it brings life, and it gives us peace, and it allows us to bring you glory, which is what we're about. So help us to get our arms around this difficult concept so that we might change the world, one person and one relationship at a time. In Christ's name we pray, amen.